So welcome everybody. For those of you who weren't part of the opening session live on Twitter, my name is Andrea Charlson. I work for London Waste and Recycling Board and I am the project manager for the Circuit project in London. Welcome to this breakout session, which is looking at embedding circular construction into city policy. We have got two speakers lined up for you in this session. We've got Doug Simpson from the GLA and David Cheshire from AECOM. I'll introduce them both properly in a minute, but just so you're aware of what's going to happen, both Doug and David are going to do a presentation each, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions afterwards rather than doing them after each presentation. So we're going to hear two presentations and then we're going to do questions. There is a question and answer function within Zoom. If you hover to the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what interface you're using, you should see a Q&A option. You can post a question in there. You can also see, you should be able to see what other questions people have asked as well, and upvote or downvote those if your question's already been asked. And we'll get through as many of them as we can at the end of the session. There's also a chat box. We won't be monitoring the chat box for questions though. So if there's a formal question that you want to ask the panelists, please put it in the question and answer session box. The chat box is just to say hello to everyone else who's here. So without any further ado, I will move on. Yeah. So our first speaker is Doug Simpson from the GLA. Doug is the Circular Economy and Waste Policy Lead for the Greater London Authority. He's got 18 years environmental policy experience, predominantly for the GLA, leading the development of London's waste and circular economy programme policy. His latest related work is developing the new London Plan, Circular Economy Policy and Guidance for Developers. And that's what he is going to talk us through this morning. So I will hand over to Doug.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrea. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, I'll look to my panel to give me the affirmative. Thank you very much. Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this morning's session and enjoying the start of CE Week. Andrea just gave a very succinct introduction to who I am and what I do, and essentially in a nutshell my role is to work with our WARB and other partners to try to embed circular economy into all the mayor's strategic documents. And on this sheet here you can see the main ones that we put out. The London Environment Strategy we put out in May 2018, and really we're trying to sort of build on the good work that's already been done across other areas of environmental sustainability, and try and really get the circular economy brand really well known and etched into those strategic plans. And for the context for this discussion, this webinar on the built environment, the main document that I've worked with colleagues to really embed circularity is within the London Plan. And last April, we had the examination in public for the draft London Plan, which we expect to be adopted this year. And really pleasingly, the circular economy policy that we put in, which I'll talk to briefly, really went through unhinged, which was really, really great to see. I think there's a lot of engagement early on, and I think the core messaging around why we need to move to more circular economy, why construction can play such an important part into how we procure and consume resources, there was a really good sort of mobilisation of sort of support for the same message and getting that through the policies. So that was very pleasing. But in parallel to that, we wanted to look at other opportunities for where we could get a foothold into strategic documents to make circular economy a reality. And one of those areas was around procurement. So that same year in 2018, we adopted the GLA Group Responsible Procurement Policies. That includes the Greater London Authority Office itself, London Fire Brigade, Metropolitan Police, and also Transport for London. So some quite chunky organisations there that collectively spend about £9 billion a year on procurement. So if we can get circularity embedded into that policy, send a very strong signal to the market that if you want to work with the GLA group, you need to be designing and developing products and services that adopt and demonstrate circular economy principles, especially around designing waste out and designing for reuse, repair, remanufacture, etc. So they were the two main platforms, if you like, around the London Plan and responsible procurement. And the rest of that slide is really about the work that the London Waste Recycling Board did, looking at focus areas, the 5 main focus areas around plastics, electronics, textiles, food, and the built environment, and trying to get some agendas and support effectively with those sectors. And then finally, just to try and warm up the industry, the built environment industry, we developed a design for Circular London, Circular Economy document at the end of last year, which is really just to get the industry going and interested into what we mean by a circular economy in the design space. So that's a very much a quick sort of run through over the strategic context for how we're looking to embed circularity into the Mayor strategic plans. Right, there we go. So really this is about taking the sort of generic circular economy definition, which this one's taken from Plan C, but very similar to the one that's put out by the Alan MacArthur Foundation, and trying to apply it to the built environment. And obviously there's very different ways people interpret circular economy, but the idea is we're trying to sort of develop our buildings, our built environment and spaces in a way that build for longevity, that can build our buildings for adaptation, modularity, to source materials from more sustainable and renewable sources, and try and get more value out of our assets. So it's not just a sort of build it, sort of knock it down after 20, 25 years and then send it all off to landfill or incineration. We're trying to sort of build in a way that gives some sort of a way to retain value within those assets. And the modularity part, I think, is a really fascinating part, which we'll come on to a bit later on. So what is the policy? So the policy is basically embedded into 2 separate policy areas. One is London Plan SI 7, or Sustainable Industry 7, and that is where the traditional sort of waste materials policy was. But to really make this fly, we felt that it had to work very closely with the design policies in the London Plan. So D1 sets out some circular economy principles, which my colleague Dave Cheshire will talk about it more in his side of the presentation. But we really wanted to make sure that circularity was thought about at the very outset of the planning process, and making sure that the architects and designers, the real creative side at the beginning of the process was very much in the room and informing the design of the building. And I alluded to before, the 3 main sort of principles are around how can we build our assets for longevity, adaptability, disassembly, not just looking at residential, but looking at, well, what could happen beyond that first point of use if you had to change a residential building into something else. How could it be done in a cost-effective and meaningful way? And then looking at more at sourcing, specifying clean green materials, and a lot of good work is already happening. And really, this is about trying to mainstream that work and making it the norm, and trying to get some innovation out of this at the same time. Trying to say to the sector, look, you come to us with some really good ideas as to what circularity looks like in the built environment space. So we accept that we're pioneering and learning at the same time. But I think this policy really gives the opportunity to the market to come forward with some great solutions, but at the same time sets some pretty clear parameters and outcomes for what we want to achieve as a city. And then really the final part, which is just really good about good waste management. We've got some pretty punchy targets in the London Plan, which have been there for a while. 95% recycling or beneficial use of construction, demolition and excavation waste. We're only recycling about half of that now across all those waste streams in total, although construction, demolition waste are a bit higher, punching about 80%. And then municipal waste, the rest of the waste that is commonly found in the household waste stream and some small businesses, ramping up from about 50% today to 65% by 2030. So really, if we do the design parts well, then you'd have less waste left over and a better chance for reuse and recycling. Okay, so I haven't got control. Andrew, can you maybe nudge me on the next screen? Thank you. Okay, and so this is really, I'll just touch on this very, very quickly because Dave will work on this more, but this is taking the core sort of circularity definition and applying it to the built environment. And so I've covered across those principles, but this image here is really talking about how can we start to consider and build in circularity from the very outset, looking at the stuff and the space that goes into a building, and working all the way up to the outer layers. But the main principle all around is how you design these assets in a way that allow them to last or allow them to be easily deconstructed and disassembled. Okay, I've got control of that, thank you. So the next stage was, well, great, we've got the policy there, but how can we really support developers and architects to come forward with the solutions that we want? Bearing in mind that, as I said before, we are pioneering and learning at the same time. So we work very closely with AECOM and our WARB and other partners, particularly on the construction side and the architect side, to develop some guidance that would help developers come forward with some solutions that demonstrate circularity in their building. So to meet the policy, you have to design and put forward a circular economy statement. And to do that, the guidance sets out what's expected within that statement and the sort of good practice and reporting that we would expect. And what I really wanted to do with our partners is to make sure that it was developed and designed by those that are going to use it. So it's not just people like myself sitting in a policy office, it's actually practitioners that are using this stuff to make sure it makes sense, it has a material impact, and it's deeply relevant to their core business work, and that their supply chains can be part of the journey as well. We're not just taking a few players, we're trying to take everyone in the process. So there are three main aspects to completing a circular economy statement. The first one is this decision tree image, which I've got up here. Starting from the left and moving to the right, the first sort of discussion really is about can the project look at a refurbishment as a starting point? Can you look at a building and do some sort of pre-demolition audit or decommission it in a way where its materials can be recovered to put back into to a new asset? So by going through this first decision-making process, is it technically feasible to actually take a building down and reconstruct it in a way that is still fit for purpose and meets the requirements for that development? And after you've exhausted that sort of decision-making process, you then look at, right, okay, if I am building new, what is the life expectancy for this building? Is it short-term, less than 25 years? The sort of pop-up type design? We see a lot of marketplaces these days especially adopt that approach where it's materials can quite easily be put up and then disassembled and put back into a use off-site. Or is it something that's looking to be around for a long time, so a very high-rise apartment building, 25 years plus? How can you design it in a way that's built to last a long time, but also has that flexibility to be bolted on additional units if need be, but also if there's a change in land use for whatever reason, can it be adapted and moderated in a way that keeps the physical structure, if you like, but just changes the internal structures and so forth to try and make sure that asset can last as long as possible. So again, fairly fundamental, basic decision tree principles, but again, as I said, we want to sort of mainstream it and make this as a core process to go through. We then have two reporting templates. And before I get onto that, when developing the statement, it's also about the narrative that you're bringing. So what is the story that you're telling about this building and how you're trying to make it and demonstrate that circular economy principles have been applied. And in doing so, you need to be reporting against some sort of metric. So the first reporting template we have is a bill of materials or a pass bill of materials. There's another term that's been given to it. And this is very much looking at the diagram I showed before, the structure, the shell, the space, looking at the inner layers, if you like, of the development, and seeing where the opportunities lie best for developing circular economy approaches. So working through these columns very quickly, starting with the foundation and floors. What is the material quantity? So what is the intensity, if you like, of the materials that are used? Material intensity, kilograms per meters squared. So you get an idea of what are you procuring and bringing into the building. And what we've said as a minimum ambition is to have at least 20% of the material sourced from reused or recycled content, and that's a RAP benchmark. The Olympics managed to reach about 25%. We're seeing other developments go even higher. So that was our sort of minimum benchmark, and over time we would expect that to increase as we understand the possibility, if you like, of how you can best embed circularity into these structures. And the second template is a fairly straightforward waste and recycling reporting template. We've linked this in with other tools such as SmartWise, so it should appear quite familiar to many of the users, particularly on the construction side. So how much waste are you producing or expecting to produce across the main waste streams, excavation, demolition and construction? How much are you expecting to be able to reuse and recycle on site? and then reuse, recycle off-site. And as I said before, we've got a 95% recycling or reuse target for those waste streams, and then moving down to municipal waste again, how much will be produced, expected, reused, recycled, and sent to other uses. So again, this is fairly straightforward, I think, in terms of what would normally expect to happen, but we've not done this in such a formal way before to report and record on the information to understand where the best opportunities lie and actually where things are actually happening for real. And I'll come on to sort of post-completion in a moment. Just a very quick run through on the actual application stage. Again, the detail of this is set out in the guidance. But essentially, this applies to, I should say earlier on actually, this only applies to major referable schemes to the Mayor of London. So anything over 140 units gets referred to the Mayor, although we are encouraging local authorities to adopt their own thresholds for circular economy statements. And in fact, some boroughs are already doing that, which is fantastic to see. But at the moment, we wanted to sort of walk the walk, if you like, with referable schemes and see how that applies, and then start to work with local authorities to see how they could adopt threshold for circular economy statements. So there's an outline application stage, and really this is about starting with a skeleton document, outlining the narrative and the ambition for the development, including a method statement and some draft tables of the sort of interventions and commitments you're making. And as you go through the application process, putting some meat on the bones, fleshing out the detail, what is the level of ambition, really tightening up the commitments of what you intend to put in play, and plans for reporting against those targets and commitments. And again, really, those targets and commitments are very much linked and pegged to the recycling targets, because that's what we have the mandate to do. And we've left a lot of flexibility to the sector to really come forward with where they think they can commit and set targets more on the inner loops of circularity, if you like. So around reuse, remanufacturing, we've set a benchmark of 20%, as I said before, sourcing sustainable materials, but what else can be done and go higher than that target for that policy. And then at the end of the development, it's about lessons learned really, and there's a requirement to produce a post-practical completion document, and that's really sort of a reflection, looking back on what's worked. It's not about trying to sort of pull the carpet out from people. It's trying to understand what has worked and what is reasonable to push for within reason. So, and we've just given some examples of what the evidence might look like around written agreements, some drawings, photos, evidence on reporting against recycling targets, etc. So really we're trying to balance up commitments and outcomes, tightened up to the London plan, but at the same time trying to give some flexibility to the sector to come forward for what they feel is achievable. And the idea is we'll pull together this I suppose, a repository of good practice to better inform the policy, and also to showcase good practice to inspire other developments at the same time. There will be some integration with other supporting documents. There's always a risk when you introduce a new policy that you might duplicate other parts of policy that are required, and we're very keen that we didn't do that. And we think we've done this in a way that doesn't duplicate the other statements that are due. So we've just really tried to make a point that if you're going to develop and put forward a circular economy statement, that you cross-reference the other ones around energy statements, designed for access statements, and in fact a waste operational plan can be quite well integrated into the circular economy statements. You're not having to produce two documents. So we're very much aware of that, and we think that those other statements can talk to the circular economy statement quite well. So just as a bit of a quick sum up on next steps and where we are, the guidance we've put out is draft. It is a pre-consultation draft. There will be a full consultation when the London plan goes out to publish. We had intended to publish in the spring, but given where we are now, that's going to be pushed out probably next another 2 or 3 months at least. But there will be a chance to seek interest, so I would encourage you to engage in that consultation. And at the same time, we're building capacity within our own planners at the GLA, but also with local authority planners to try and get their views on how to, as I said before, set thresholds for developing these statements, but also for understanding where they think the best practices and where they think the best opportunities are within their built environment portfolio going forward. And the idea is once we've done the consultation and the London plan is out, we should be able to produce a final version of the guidance at the end of this year. But we are encouraging applications to use the guidance now. We had, as I said, in the examination of public, the policy sailed through, so we have a mandate enough, if you like, with the draft London plan to encourage developers to use it now, and we are actually already seeing that now. We've got at least 4 applications in that are putting forward circular economy statements, and they're all very, very encouraging to see. So that's very positive. Okay, I'll leave it there. I'm conscious of time. I've got a couple of images of what we've got in terms of what good practice looks like, but I think Dave will cover some of that off in his presentation. So, Andrew, if you're happy to, I'll pass on to Dave to carry on.
Great, thank you, Doug. Yes, and thank you for that really great overview into both the background of where the circular economy statement has come from, and for the overview of what it is you're hoping to see in those statements. So I'm going to hand over to David now. David is a regional director at AECOM, and he specialises in sustainability in the built environment. He's got over 25 years experience acting as a sustainability champion on construction projects, and has written best practice guidance for the industry on this. He is also the author of Building Revolutions, a REBA book, which explains how to apply the circular economy to the built environment. And the hierarchy proposed in that book has been referenced in the draft London plan. And I think he's going to tell us a lot more about it now. So, David, if you want to try and control the screen.
Yep, brilliant. Thank you, Andrea. Let's see if this works. Yes, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Doug. That was really great, and it's just great to hear that this is all actually happening now, and we've got a policy in place. So what I just want to talk about is just briefly the principles, and then I'll just expand on some of the circular economy principles with some practical examples of what we're seeing happening, or ideas that we're putting forward on projects. So this is just a recap that we're busy digging stuff out of the ground. This is mining bauxite in the Amazon rainforest, which is used to make bauxite is used to make aluminium. So we're busy designing and building all our new buildings. Then all this stuff is busy trashing pristine environments and valuable habitats. And at the other end of the scale, we've got all these buildings that we're busy knocking down in our cities. In London, we're just working on a project now, actually, where they're proposing to demolish the building after only 30 years. And it's quite common that after 40 years, buildings are knocked down and you're left with this, basically, which is a whole load of rubble, most of which will not be recycled. Although we say it's recycling, I'd say it's downcycling. So it becomes structural concrete, gets crushed and then used for road base or for piling mats. It doesn't get used to make new structural concrete again. And similarly with metals and plastics and everything, that generally recycled to lower grade alloys or lower grade polymers. So what should we be doing better? Well, I think as a lot of you will know, so the idea of the circular economy is against the linear economy I was just talking about there, where we dig stuff out of the ground, we use it for a while, and then we throw it away. Whereas the circular economy, the idea is we're trying to close that loop and get things much more, keeping the value of the components, the materials, and even the buildings. So this is the hierarchy that I proposed in my book, which then sort of builds up gradually, bringing together all the ideas around from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and other places. So the idea we're retaining our existing buildings if we can, refitting and refurbishing before we start to build new. If we are building new, make sure that we can actually keep those buildings there for a long time. So can we make them more adaptable so they'll still be endure and be there for 100 years rather than 30. And then the outer three circles are really about how we reclaim, reuse bits of the building and then remanufacture parts of the building. And then the last gasp is if we have to recycle or compost, depending whether it's a biological material or whether it's a technical material like metals or plastics. And then on top of that, I layered the design supports, which is for new builds for major refurbishments. So, and I'll pick up a couple of these as I go through the presentation, but nothing particularly new here, but I tried to bring it all together into one coherent structure, which works really well with the circular economy principles. And then around the outside there, I'll also talk about circular business models a bit later on, but this idea that you don't have to buy stuff and consume it. You could be paying as a sort of pay-per-use model, or you could be returning stuff back to manufacturers for remanufacture and things. So sort of different business models. And then lastly, waste as a resource is this idea that we as designers, we are creating the concept of waste. So can we actually redesign stuff so that we think about the next life of that, not just thinking about the first life of it? And therefore, hopefully in the long term, we can get rid of this idea that there is such thing as waste, and actually everything is just reclaimed and reused, and has an ongoing value. So that was my book. I started writing and researching that in 2014. It was published in 2016. And what was amazing is the London Plan then came forward with a circular economy policy in 2017 was the first draft, I think, of the London Plan, and it's all progressed over the last couple of years to turn into pretty much ready to publish, or intent to publish, document which is fantastic. And as Andrea mentioned, they were very kindly decided or asked if they could include my diagram in there. So it's always good to get a color diagram forward, because that's the thing that sticks in people's memories, I think, and gets a message across quickly. So those principles I'll just talk about briefly. So this idea of building in layers, as Doug mentioned, is this idea that you have different layers to your building. So it's very difficult to apply, or very different to apply circular economy principles to a building it is to, say, a laptop or a mobile phone or something, because the buildings, there's thousands of components in it, and they all have massively different lifespans, from the structure hopefully there for 100 years, and then maybe the interiors, maybe the carpet's there for 6 months or 2 years, or whatever the lease period in that building is, and for retail maybe even faster. So you have this massive difference in there, and I think you have to apply different principles to different layers. So the structure, long life, loose fit, whereas the interiors, you might say, well, I'll design for 2-year life, and maybe use more biological materials, or think about ways that these bits could be returned to the manufacturer. I think the other thing that's important about the layers thing is that actually you want to make those layers independent, so you can peel off one of the layers without affecting another one, and lots of examples of that. Go. Yeah. So, and then talking about design for adaptability. So there's lots of research, or I did lots of research around this, and it's really interesting that there's not an awful lot around how you design for adaptability. The main thing seems to be that we have to look backwards and see what buildings have successfully stayed with us, really. And you'll see that, the Victorian warehouses, Georgian townhouses are components or buildings that have stayed. Oh, it's just carrying on then. What's going on there? Have stayed with us and dodged the wrecking ball, basically. And I think there was some very clear common factors. Rectilinear floor plates were very clear, nice simple floor plates that allowed people to swap and change the uses in the building, as this building is ably demonstrated, now used as the University of Arts building, and has all sorts of uses in it. Good use of good generous floor to ceiling heights, cores that are well placed cores that allow you to adapt to different uses, and those are some of the elements. And of course, that actually turned into a building that people actually really enjoy being in, I think, and like having around. And this has really turned into the crown jewels for that King's Cross redevelopment there. And then design for disassembly. I mean, clearly you could be disassembling the whole building and reconfiguring it somewhere else, which there are a few examples of that, with modular homes, for example. Place Ladywell is a project we did with Rogers Architects that is actually currently has been just taken down and is going to be moved to another site. But in terms of the details, so this was an example of one example we found when we were doing some research with UCL, which is looking at how you can actually have a dry lay floor system. So you basically have dry lay floor tiles, they're laid onto a rubberized grid. You can take them up, take them down, move them around if you want to move your T-point around or whatever. This has been used on Heathrow Terminal 5, so it's actually, it's something is being used. And actually, although each tile is more expensive, it only takes 2 days to lay the floor rather than 2 weeks. So you make a massive saving in there. And you can imagine that if you could start to apply this to all of our interiors, this idea that you get rid of some of the wet trades or all of the wet trades, and you start having modular systems that are regular sized and could allow you to reconfigure spaces without actually having to take take the sledgehammer out and trash everything, and then end up crushing and shredding everything, and then bringing in new resources. You can see how that would make a massive difference. There's so many refits and minor refurbs going on all the time. And then lastly, looking at selecting components and materials. So this was on a site near our office, actually, which I haven't been to for 10 weeks now. So this was actually some raised floor tiles that were taken out of this building that was being demolished. And I thought they were going to recycle. I thought, oh, brilliant, they're going to reuse them or something. But no, they just left them out there, and they got water damaged, and they'll go for recycling rather than reuse, I'm sure, because once they get wet, they start to warp and things. But these are standard products. They're 600 by 600 mil. You know, they're bulletproof things. So interesting, we found these. I'm going to advertise these guys because they're the only people I know of at the moment in the UK doing this. So there's RMF are actually remanufacturing these raised floor tiles. So they will clean them all up. They'll take them away from on site, they will clean them all up, and then they will sell them back into the industry for 3/4 of the price of new ones, so 25% cheaper basically, and they will re-warranty them and everything. So you have this sort of fantastic idea that you can see how modular bits of the building, like we've done with bricks for years and years and years, for high quality bricks, when they're laid in lime mortar, you can reclaim them and sell them on. So you could imagine we could apply that more widely, how many thousands of tons of materials we could be saving. And then lastly, looking at circular economy business models. And on a similar vein to the raised floor tiles there, so this is a remanufactured paint. So Paint 360, and there's lots of others around the UK, provide this idea where actually they'll take the leftover paints from your construction sites. They will take that and use that as a raw material to make new paint. So they basically remanufacture paint and create new paint. It costs about the same as buying new, but the difference is, of course, if you give them their raw materials to make the paint, then they will give you money off your purchases. So sort of really nice sort of circular model there, and also they're social enterprise, so that's good for people as well. So those are sort of the main, I'll whiz through those are the main principles. Just to finish off, we did some work, or are doing still actually some work with the University of Sheffield and a couple of excellent PhD students there, and they have created, or we've worked together to create a new circular economy tool, it is up and ready to be tested online now. If you would like to have a go, you just have to Google regenerate and then circular economy tool, and you'll find it there, and you can still Excel at the moment, but you can download it and have a go. So it's based around the principles that Doug was outlining at the beginning, and will help you with generating circular economy statements, but it's also a way to try and get people to think about how they can make their projects more circular, and it's to answer the question, how circular is your building? So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for all those great examples of, well, the explanation of the principles, but also the examples of how they're already being adopted. I will come to the questions that are going in the question and answer set box very, very soon. So if you've got any questions for David or Doug, do put them in there. First of all, I have a question for Doug. And it's related to the current unusual situation that we all find ourselves in, working at home and doing these things via Zoom. And do you think that this COVID-19 pandemic and the response to it is going to have any adverse impacts on adopting the London Plan, the circular economy policy and its implementation?
Sure, thanks, Andrew. It actually links into Wayne Hubb's last question as well, around when the London Plan's set to be adopted. So if I start with COVID, I think what was really encouraging to see is that construction is one of the first sectors that's been given the green light, or the green light of sorts, by the government to get back underway. So I think absolutely construction sector and its supply chain has a really important role, and I think has a remit and an opportunity to get back into the swing of things pretty quickly. There's been I saw some messaging out last 2 days around a lot of business leaders saying, yes, we need to make sure that climate change and sustainable development is absolutely at the heart of the green recovery. So I think there is a momentum gathering around making sure that this sort of activity around circular economy is embedded, in particular in construction. And I think policy does have a role to play in that. So in order to create those conditions for circular economy to thrive, the sooner that we get the London Plan policy adopted, the better, obviously. And at the moment, we've not been given a firm date because of what's happened with COVID. But I have been told it should be this year, 2020. But as I did say before, the policy is, although it's in draft, we have the guidance out, and we've been given advice that it holds sufficient weight to be used now. Hence why we are encouraging applications to come forward, and we are seeing that. As I said before, that there is a genuine interest and excitement. I think that's also pegged to the fact that we engage very heavily with at least a dozen fairly a combination of larger and smaller players in the market. So they've informed what is in the guidance and the policy, and so hopefully it's not coming as a surprise, and it is building on a lot of the good things that are already happening.
Great, thank you very much. So David, I think there's probably a couple for you here. I'm gonna start with the one that came in first, which is how do you deal with the main issue of convincing clients to agree to use, for example, recycled materials such as glass or components in your project? There's kind of a secondary question which kind of is assumed in the first question, I guess, which is, in your experience, how much resistance is coming from the clients?
Well, yeah, no, it's a big problem, and I'm not sure it's necessary. Resistance is coming necessarily from the clients. I think that I think the whole industry is not geared towards certainly using reclaimed components in a big way. But and there's good reasons for that. I mean, if you've got new components, you know where they've come from. You can get warranties, and you all those sort of issues around. Whether it's going to be a valid and warranted material and product is there, and I think what we've got to do is we've got to raise the game of the reclamation sector. So for that, and that is why I was giving those a couple of examples of that one with the reclaimed floor tiles was brilliant, because they basically a manufacturer of floor tiles who's also providing a service that is a reclaimed one, so you can actually go to them. And what I'm hoping is we get more and more of that. And I think it's one of those chicken and egg things that if we don't ask for this stuff, it's not going to come there. And of course, if the stuff isn't there, we're not going to ask for it. So actually, I think as designers and clients have to start insisting on this stuff and show that there's a demand for it. And it might not happen on the first project, but by the third or fourth project, then it hopefully will kick in and be better, and often it is cheaper, so it does make sense.
Great, thank you. There's a kind of question that's come in almost as a follow-up to your response. I think it's directed at Doug, but I would quite like to jump in and answer it as well. But the question is there any policy level enablers happening on warranty and certification?
Did you want me to kick off on that?
Do you want to kick off, or would you like me to? Yeah, so as hopefully many of you are aware, that today's event is being hosted by Circuit Project. If you don't know much about the Circuit Project, have a look on Twitter, because you can see a live feed of our introductory session this morning. But one of the work streams that we're looking at on Circuit is around policy enablers, and we've also got a work package looking at demolition and reuse, and so there's a big chunk of work embedded in that project, which the GLA are partners in, looking at what additional policy enablers could be implemented and how would they be implemented. And warranties has already been highlighted as a potential area that we will be exploring throughout that project. So that's 3 years away from accumulation, but there's a work program in place looking at that specific issue. Did you want to add anything to that, Doug?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great question. I think just on the enabler side and certification, what I've been very keen to push government on is to adopt a similar scheme what they've done in Sweden, like a VAT break essentially on reused reclaimed materials, because at the moment there's not great incentive, unless it's easy to do. There's not a great incentive to reclaim a lot of materials. So I think that national policy framework is important, and therefore are grappling with this as well as wider sort of waste and materials management policy. I think that will be a fundamental game changer if there is that direct financial incentive to source and use materials. That partly goes somewhere, I think, to addressing some of the earlier question that was raised on the Q&A box around how to get people to actually use those things to start with.
Okay, you broke up just a little bit at the end there for me, but I think we heard most of your response.
Okay.
I would like to direct another question to David. It's come through on the Q&A, and it's a big high-level question, and it's, should we refit or rebuild? And try not to say it depends.
Oh yeah, well, I'm not going to say that. No, that's a great question. I think I think deep refurbishment is probably our best option for any buildings that we can do that with. Obviously, there's some that would just, you know, some projects we're working on where you just think, okay, this was an old, I don't know, power station thing or something that's just completely, you know, really difficult to do anything with. But I think where there's a clear sort of structure and substructure of a building that we could reuse, and then I think that then ideally ticks both boxes, because if you do a deep enough refurb, you can change the fabric over to something that would then give you better operational performance, but you're keeping, you know, 50% of the embodied carbon and the resources of that building, which is mainly locked up in the substructure and the structure and the floors. So that I think would be the best option. Obviously, like refits and refurbs, it's really interesting looking at the numbers now that you see that, you know, there's kind of 1,200 kilograms CO2 per meter squared sort of thing for embodied carbon, for example, and then maybe 20 kilograms of CO2 every year for operational performance. So it actually does it makes a lot more sense to not knock down buildings if you can, and actually start to refurb. I know that's pretty controversial stuff, but I think that's what ideally that's what the numbers and the circular economy approach would where it would lead you, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for answering the big question. That's really great. So I think we've got time for just one more question. I'm going to ask it to both of you. It's come through on the Q&A, and the question is, can you recommend any guidance or support available for projects that are at very early design stages with minimum material quantity information?
Well, obviously, Doug can answer on. We've got the circular economy statement guidance. There's the primer that GLA have written. There's a great book apparently called Building Revolutions, and but you have to buy 2 copies of that, by the way, one for your friend and everything. But also there's the tool we just talked about, and that was all designed around the idea of really early stage stuff. So asking those questions around you know, what's the strategy for the project? How are you going to look at this from the very early stages? So it's not data hungry. It doesn't require you to input information around, you know, what's the thickness of your wall and all this sort of stuff. It really is supposed to be those strategic questions to make you think in the right way. Yeah,
and I think I'd just echo that really, and just to add that, you know, the whole idea is that the guidance that is published and the link is available, and if it's not on the information provided, I'll make sure it gets out. That can apply to any project at any stage. It's very much focused on the early stages, of course, but I think it's adaptable enough to any project to be used on any project at any stage. And the metrics and the tools that are available, so it refers to a lot of tools that are already in existence. It refers to BREEAM, how to enable to get BREEAM credits. I mentioned SmartWise. So the idea is it's something that should be able to just take and drop into existing tools that you are using to generate the numbers and the metrics. But also, Dave referred to the CE Primer document which you sent out, and that really also is that's got some good references, some good projects that are already in play, and some good links and contacts if we want to sort of start having conversations with those that are already pioneering and leading in this space as well. And again, this is all, so we are pioneering and learning, and we'll be building a repository of good practice that will be making available in time as we start to get more of these circular economy statements through. So I think, yeah, the combination of, yes, we have stuff, information there now, but in time we'll also be building up some good practice that we'll make available.
Well, that's great. Thank you both. And I can also make a plug as well for one of our other circuit partners. The UK Green Building Council have published 2 documents over the past 2 years, one focusing on circular economy in general and one focusing on reuse. They say they're pitched at clients, but I think the reason they're pitched at clients is because they're about those very early stage decision processes. So, and I think there's useful information in those documents for all parts of the built environment value chain. We will find a way to share the links with you to all of those guidance documents and the tools. It will probably be in a post-event email. So apologies if we didn't get to answer your question, but we are out of time.